my first husband and I split up, I felt very uncertain about the future. And what was the thing that caused the most anxiety in that moment? It was the frickin' mortgage. You do the thing you're supposed to do and you keep doing the thing you're supposed to do. But when really uncertain things hit your life, then it makes you take a step back and reassess.
Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and this is episode 279 with Laura Lynch. Laura Lynch is a certified financial planner who specializes in helping people financially execute their plans to go tiny. Laura shares her insights on the unique aspects of tiny living, including the financial considerations and the importance of creating a supportive community for the long term. She also opens up about her own journey towards embracing the tiny lifestyle and aligning all aspects of her life to her authentic self. We'll also discuss the financial questions and challenges that arise when it comes to tiny houses, such as loans and prioritizing sweat equity. It's going to be an eye-opening conversation, so let's dive in and explore the world of less house, more moolah with Laura Lynch. I asked John and Finn Kernahan of United Tiny House Association what they love about their precision temp hot water heaters, and here's what they told me.
Hey, Ethan, this is John and Finn Kernahan with United Tiny House Association.
We organize Tiny House Festival.
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
First and foremost.
We have a total of 3 precision temp on-demand hot water heaters. The thing we really like about these, and folks know this, I think they picked this up on Finn and I, if we don't like something, you'll never hear us talk about it. So the 2 things we noticed that we noticed and experienced immediately, they took painstaking effort to make sure that it was done right and installed. And so that was pretty cool right there. The other thing is the continuous on-demand hot water that just ran forever without any fluctuations or anything. I can't imagine an application, especially in our environment and our lifestyle of being the nomad, transportable, mobile, tiny lifestyle where one of these units aren't good to use.
Right now, Precision Temp is offering $100 off any unit plus free shipping when you use the coupon code THLP. So head over to precisiontemp.com and use the coupon code THLP at checkout for $100 off any unit. That's PRECISION temp.com, coupon code THLP. Thank you so much to Precision Temp for sponsoring our show. All right, I am here with Laura Lynch. Laura is the founder of The Tiny House Advisor, a financial planning firm for tiny living values. She is a certified financial planner practitioner, podcast host, and tiny house enthusiast. Laura has personal experience and a passion for tiny living. She and her partner Eric built their tiny home in 2016 and are in the process of downsizing into that lifestyle full-time. She is dedicated to helping others find financial autonomy and make an impact through tiny living. Laura Lynch, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ethan. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I thought we could start with just your story and, why did you decide to build a tiny home in 2016?
Yeah, so it's a fun story, really, because for me, a tiny house was a solution to a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I had found myself the owner of some land, and I didn't know how we were going to build something to stay in on the land because the land was kind of far away.
Okay.
And I was in the corporate world at that time. So, you know, the deal, 2 weeks vacation, not enough time to go out and build a house. So, I think maybe it was a little traveling along the Oregon coast where I saw some tiny houses. I'm not exactly sure what spawned the idea, but we decided to build a tiny house on our property in Florida and then take it out to our land out west. So it was our solution for how do we get a house on land far away?
Wow. And so did you DIY the build?
Yes. So we bought a gooseneck trailer off of Craigslist for like $3,000 and we stripped it down and we started from the floor up.
Wow. That's a good deal.
Yeah.
And any building experience prior to that?
So I grew up in families that built their own houses. So I guess I probably had a hammer in my hand at a pretty young age, but had kind of gotten out of that,
Cool.
sort of muscle memory, if you will.
Yeah.
So I did during my undergrad spend a year kind of doubling up on education and did a building technology program,
Okay.
which I think just enabled my feeling of confidence around using tools. And so when we got into the tiny house build, I felt, pretty comfortable doing that thing. So didn't start from ground zero like a lot of people do,
Okay.
but I think it's just a little bit of familiarity helps you feel confident to move forward with the next step.
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, I had maybe built a chicken coop when I started my tiny house build, and I found it really intimidating, but also very learnable.
Yeah.
And now, like over 10 years out, I haven't done another big build like that,
Mhm.
but just the familiarity, just having done it once before, I feel like I could jump in if I needed to.
Yeah, it's like that muscle memory. It's that sort of self efficacy that we build by taking one little step. And then we feel, oh, if I can do that, I can do the next thing. And I think that's really important for people to know is that you can build your capability and it's not that challenging to get a little confidence to move forward.
Yeah. So was your intention when you built the tiny house and moved it out there to one day live in it full time, or was it more just like, hey, we have this land and we want a place to stay when we visit?
It wasn't at that time.
Mhm.
Our move towards tiny full time has been an evolution that really got kicked off big time with the pandemic.
Mm,
So I think that that helped us all reset our thoughts about where we want to live our lives and spend our time and what's most important to us. And so through that experience, Eric and I really had an opportunity to reassess where we want to live our lives.
okay.
And so then the tiny house became the solution again for where we want to go full time.
Interesting. So would you are there things about your house that you would have done differently with knowing that you wanted to live in it full time?
I don't think that there's anything that we did or didn't do that makes it
Mhm.
any more livable for the long term than for the short term. I don't have a dryer. I'm sure lots of people in tiny houses don't have dryers.
Yep.
I dry my laundry outside. I don't have a dishwasher, so I hand wash my dishes.
Mhm.
I think that that helps you sort of ground yourself, especially since I'm moving into a place where the clothes will dry really, really easily outside.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's okay to kind of simplify yourself in those respects.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it's just all what you want from
Mhm.
life. Like I know that I wish my tiny house had a dishwasher personally, but that's just me. Uh, so tiny houses are a great, kind of vehicle for saving money.
Mhm.
And, my original intent with my tiny house was a house that I could own outright so that I could lower my monthly expenses significantly. I'm curious, at what point did you kind of make that connection and kind of tie your professional life, as a financial advisor into tiny house living?
Yeah, so good. So, I've owned big houses, regular houses, normal
Hmm.
houses. I bought my first, I guess, starter home in 2007, right before the Great
Hmm.
Recession. And I
Hmm.
bought the book, House Buying for Dummies. I studied up, I got myself ready, I saved my down payment, I did all the things.
Uh-huh.
And then the market crashed, right?
Oh.
And that happened at the time that my first husband and I split up. And so our house ended up kind of in a weird anchor in the midst of a really emotional storm.
Hmm.
And I think that that taught me some important lessons, but I didn't learn them then. I learned them later on in life when we bought the current house that I'm currently standing in while we're recording this that is on its way out of my life. Because again, in the pandemic, there we were in a world where there was so much uncertainty. And I felt very uncertain about the future. And what was the thing that caused the most anxiety in that moment? It was the frickin' mortgage, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that sort of snowballing of that life lesson, kind of you do the thing you're supposed to do and you keep doing the thing you're supposed to do, but when really uncertain things hit your life, then it makes you take a step back and reassess. As the thing that I'm doing that I'm supposed to be doing really working for me? And does it make me feel okay when things are not okay? And so I think it was that moment where I was like, gosh, the world feels so uncertain. My income is dropping right now.
Yeah.
And here I've got this mortgage I've got to pay. And yet I have this tiny house that has no mortgage that, because we built it all ourselves, it's very low cost living. Why am I not living there? Why am I doing this mortgage thing right now when I could be doing the no mortgage thing and would feel so much more comfortable in this time of uncertainty? And so then, things recovered and went on, and I kept doing the corporate financial advisor role thing. And I just ached to be in my tiny house and ached to have that simplicity and really wanted to help other people do something unconventional with their lives and stop playing the game and wearing the suit and feeling like I was trying to prove something to the world, somebody that I wasn't. And so, I guess I just scrounged around and put enough money aside so that I was able to make that change and align myself all the way across all the aspects of my life. So now my roof and my way of making a living and the passion projects and the energy, all of my human capital going into my authentic version of myself. And so take some bravery to make that pivot, as I'm sure you know, because you did the same thing.
So is that, you mentioned on your website that you devised this 30-month plan. Is that, are we talking about the plan right now?
Yes. So, so we started this 30-month project plan for getting ourselves out of our normal life and into our tiny life.
Nice.
About 19 months ago, right? So we're making progress, and
about 2/3 of the way.
Yes, and the reason why it's so long for us is because it's two businesses. It's across the country. It's a lot of heavy equipment. My husband's going to continue to work in the trades, and so he's going to need, his excavator to go across the country. And so it's just a lot of logistics, but changing the businesses, I had to, change my business, start a new firm. My husband is having to change the way that he makes money. Just a lot of change in order to get ourselves to that place we want to be.
Yeah. And so, this episode will live on in the feed. So, 10 months from now, the 30 months will be over, and I hope you'll be doing it. But where are you at this point as, today, August 22nd, as we're speaking?
So geographically, I'm standing in my 1,800 square foot house in South Florida.
Okay.
And 10 months from now, if you talk to me, I will be communicating on Starlink because my tiny house is in a pretty rural place in New Mexico where internet connection, you have to kind of get a little creative there.
Yeah.
And probably still working on some of the infrastructure there. I'm also going to be taking up permaculture. So planning on spending a lot of time developing some permaculture on that land and hiking and balancing those things that are fuel for my soul, along with those things that allow me to help others do this tiny living thing.
Nice. Well, I think that the way that you're going about it is really smart. And of course, it's like it's not helpful to tell someone that the best way to the best way to be prepared for uncertainty is to have prepared in advance for that uncertainty. But it sounds like you've kind of are going about this in a very planful way.
Yes, I am a planner.
Helpful.
Yeah.
Well, what, as a planner, and it seems like as a planner who is, wanting to help other people plan, what kind of services do you offer as the tiny house advisor?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned in the intro, kindly, I am a certified financial planner. So,
Mm-hmm.
I am really focused on helping people figure out how to financially execute a project plan to go tiny, because it's a little bit different than selling your house in town and moving to another house in town where you sell one and you buy another. Oftentimes, tiny living requires some upfront money, right? You got to build or buy
Yeah.
your tiny house before you sell your or get out of your rental or what have you.
Yeah.
And then, two, there's some unique aspects to tiny living depending on whether you're doing it in a mobile environment or you're doing it rural, like I'm doing it. Who's going to be there to help me as a, you know, women live longer, right? That's just the reality. I'm, quite a bit younger than Eric, and I don't have any children.
Mm-hmm.
So when I am 95, like my wonderful grandmother is, who am I going to call on to help me? And how do I position myself in tiny living to establish myself within a community so that I have
Mm-hmm.
connections and resources and people that can support my need for social interaction and maybe help me change a light bulb and all the things. And so I think that as we live tiny, we have to be thinking about tiny living if we're thinking in the long term
Mm.
about how we take care of ourselves for our whole lifespan in this lifestyle. And so, as a financial planner, I've helped many clients plan for what we call long term care.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than just who's going to provide your medical care, but how are you going to have a community around you to support all aspects of your humanity, your friendship needs, and your go have ice cream needs, and your go explore a new trail needs, and all those things. So I think there's just a lot of unique elements to tiny living from a financial
Mm-hmm.
planning perspective. A lot of people use it in a temporary manner, right? They use tiny living
Right.
just as an opportunity to save up some money to go back to, a more traditional lifestyle. And so there's lots of nuances in tiny living that regular financial planners are probably not in the mindset to help people figure out. So that's why I'm, hanging out my shingle to help people figure this out for their unique lifestyle.
Nice. Well, I kind of came up with a couple of kind of financial tiny house related questions that I get sometimes or that I've wondered about. And so I was hoping to kind of put them to you. The first one being, I'm curious, and I'm sure that the answer is like, it depends, as it does for most things, but there are loans available for tiny houses these days. They tend to be shorter term and higher interest rate, more like a car loan than a mortgage. I'm curious whether, you would advise someone to take out a loan for a tiny home or wait and save up. Like, does the payoff of starting to live tiny sooner work out in your favor, even with a kind of higher interest rate loan?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that if you sit down, there's always a numbers answer to things, right? So you can always
Sure.
run a spreadsheet and
Run a
quantify,
spreadsheet, yeah.
right? What the numbers answer to that. But most of the time, we don't make financial decisions based on the appropriate number answer,
No,
right?
no, we don't.
We make the financial decision based on emotion. And so I think that the important thing, and maybe I'm sort of sidelining your question here, but I think the
No.
important thing for people when they're trying to make these logistical decisions about save up or borrow is really to hone in on their values and what's most important to them. Make sure that they've
Mhm.
tested out this lifestyle and that it's going to work for them. And then if they can figure out, how to make it work, they might then enable other elements of their life that will help blossom things moving forward instead of continuing to mentally hold them back. That's the thing with kind of the American dream that I'm trying to beat on all the time in my content
Yeah.
is that when we're always striving to do the thing that we've been told
Mhm.
to do, we don't open up doors to do the thing that really is most aligning with us. And so I would love to see people have opportunities to get into tiny living if that's true for them sooner.
Mhm.
Though, of course, if the loan is not going to work from a cash flow perspective, it's just not going to work. But if
Right.
either option is at play, figuring out what's most important to you at this moment of your life and what it looks like on the side if you can go ahead and make that jump.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, sitting around stewing in a place where you're unhappy, trying to save up money is really hard.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, there's always a right money answer that you can run on a spreadsheet, but then there's also
Mhm.
all the other human elements of that decision.
I'm curious, what are some maybe creative ways or some other ways that you've helped people, come up with to help pay for a tiny house?
Yeah. So I have, in my case, of
Mhm.
course, started from with a very inexpensive, just like you did, right? Where we built the
Mhm.
thing ourselves. And I think
Right.
sweat equity is really undervalued in our
Mm.
society. People
Yeah.
seem to like the idea of hiring everything out, but you pay such a premium for that. So I would say for folks that have any interest or any ability to try to build it themselves,
Mhm.
I think it can be tremendously enhancing for us personally to learn new skills that maybe we can then use in uncertain times to add value,
Yeah.
especially in a world where we know that AI is going to start to change a lot of the work that
Yeah.
people do. Having some practical skills that can't be automated away are probably just another way to build resilience. So
Yeah.
I would definitely encourage folks to think about how it's much easier to cash flow if you build it yourself, right? I had a normal corporate job
Yeah.
and, fairly at the time, very fortunately low cost of living in the house that I was in. So,
Mhm.
we would just build it and every Saturday there was a trip to Lowe's or whatever and you just build it yourself based on cash flow. And, then there's always kind of a stigma around asking family for help. And I know your family, was around when you built your tiny house. And I think that
Mhm.
generationally, current young people are at a much greater disadvantage. And I think that family members, older generations in your family can appreciate that.
Mhm.
And so I think there's no shame in maybe getting a little support from family
Yeah.
members too when you're trying to embark on, this sort of really independent piece of your life. Otherwise, there's always the good tips around thinking about where you're spending your money and really
Mhm.
digging in deep on that. How much money are you spending on entertainment type
Mhm.
things, discretionary type things? And is that the most important thing for you right now? Or is it just the way that you kind of fill up your time? And so back to values, figure out what's most important to you. And if going to tiny living is most important, then, buckle down and, do the best you can to cut out things that aren't necessary.
Yeah. When I was kind of saving up for it, I'm very much a spreadsheet kind of person. So I'm like looking at my budget and I'm saying like, well, what's my my biggest expense was my rent.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was at a point, I was in my, young to mid 20s where it still felt like, I just asked my parents if I could move home
Yeah.
and save up.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, sure. So, that was like, I don't remember exactly what I was paying in rent at the time, maybe $1,200 a month, just like straight into the tiny house fund.
Yeah.
And I know that situation isn't available to everyone, doesn't work for everyone, but, when you have a goal like a tiny house, it gets easier, I think, to kind of make sacrifices and to kind of do whatever it takes to save up what you need to achieve that goal.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely can find lots of reasons to spend money if there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing more important. And so that's why anchoring in to your values and what's most important to you and, envisioning what you want your future life to look like, giving your money
Yeah.
a purpose, saying the purpose of this money is to create simplicity and financial freedom in my life, then that gives you like a job for your money and you can stay
Yeah.
focused on that.
Yeah. Well, another area where tiny house folks are having to spend money is on rent, unfortunately.
Right.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, you build a tiny house on a trailer and it does not come with land. It's kind of independent of the land.
Yeah.
And, that rent that people are paying to park places is also, I've seen prices going up over the years.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, how, I don't know if there's even a question here, but how do you think about that, or how would you factor that in terms of your planning? It sounds like you own some land, so it was more about putting a house on that land.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the more that you and I do our work and the more popular that this lifestyle becomes for people, the
Mhm.
more rent is going to go up for sure, right? Because it's just
Yeah.
supply and demand. And so
Yeah.
parking spaces are going to get more expensive over time in the same way that rent has gotten more expensive over time. So this is where, folks that are a little further in the lifestyle need to, help build communities, right? I mean, and there's a lot of folks out there saying, I'd like to have a tiny home community. I'd like to build a tiny home community, which goes back to the important work that people are doing on the legalized front, right? Because we've got to get more counties and cities acknowledging and finding ways to legalize these communities. And so I think that there's also people, that are generous with their land, that are allowing other people to park. And maybe as things get more expensive, people also become more aware and people become more willing to allow others, to
Yeah.
share space with them, which goes to the whole point of creating community around yourself. I think that if we look back on human existence, we lived in community, we lived in village, we lived in ways that we were able to support and connect with each other. And so that community living aspect is really important for our mental wellness. And frankly, the single family home is very isolating and in many ways sort of breaks down our ability to have empathy for others and to be able to work and navigate around other people. And so
Yeah.
I think that this is all part of a larger conversation being had about the way that we live as humans. And so certainly that went way off your question of
No,
how to
it's
park.
it's a great answer.
But yeah, I mean, certainly, paying for parking is a thing, and you have to just think about where you want to park. And maybe if you're able to, which always comes back to where you have work,
Mhm.
parking in a place that's, not the most popular place in the country. Everyone is flooding, to certain areas
Yeah.
and maybe trying to avoid those certain areas.
Yeah. Well, you have a podcast, the Less House, More Moolah podcast. Tell us about the show. What's it all about?
Yeah. So my podcast is really focused on being inspiring for folks that are maybe still on the fence and haven't quite made that move yet. And also providing resources and thoughts around the financial autonomy piece, because I think
Mm-hmm.
that the tiny community broadly always talks about financial security through this lifestyle. And there hasn't been anyone really zeroed in on that particular piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
if you get into a tiny living and you reduce your cost of living, you can very easily spend all that money away and not create your financial security.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, how do we let people succeed at the financial security piece that we're all in this, as part of our motivation?
Yeah.
So, I hear from a lot of great guests that, I get to talk to about what they're doing in this space. And then we always kind of come back to the financial sort of piece of that puzzle.
Nice. Yeah. And I'm sure you have found, as I have, that, every single guest, every single tiny house dwellers, their story is just slightly different. There's no two alike.
I know. That's the great thing about this. And people have been in it at such different lengths of time too. And so it's really fascinating. And all of the guests in the community, everybody that I connect with is super friendly and willing to share their best lessons, and also maybe a little bit, I'm not really good with light conversation. I kind of like to get into the deep stuff. And so it's great to have people that are able to talk about their values and what's important to them and what lessons they've personally learned and all those things, rather than just, kind of staying on the surface.
Nice. Well, you actually graciously had me as a guest on your show, so we'll definitely link to that episode and to the show in the show notes for this episode.
Yes, in which I asked you a bunch of deep and meaningful questions.
Yes. It was you are an excellent podcast host and interviewer. It was a great conversation. Curious, one thing that I like to ask all my guests, are there any resources like books or YouTube channels or really anything that have helped to inspire you and help you out along the way that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I don't have a great list.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bit of I don't know, follow the beat of my own drum type of person.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, your
Mm-hmm.
podcast is a huge resource. Tiny House Expedition has been, I think, really pivotal in helping bring this idea to the masses through the YouTube
Mm-hmm.
channel. And they're going to be a guest on my podcast coming up soon, too. So I think that is really important for all of us to be in this space working towards bringing this awareness, because at the end of the day, not everybody that is 22 years old graduating from college, or 18-year-old graduating from high school, or 45 years old having a midlife crisis is asking themselves the right questions yet about what is holding me back from doing the things I really want to do. And very often it is the roof. And so the more work that we're doing on this to help people ask those important questions, I think that is where we really see progress. But yeah, those are some important ones. I had Melanie Copeland recently, who's written a great book, Trailblazing Tiny, on my podcast. She is just such an amazing advocate out there doing work. Felice Cohen, who lived in 90 square feet in New York and, had like a viral YouTube video. I've had so many great authors on my podcast, and all of those people are, tremendously important.
Awesome. Well, Laura Lynch, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. It was great to have you to flip the seats around and get to interview you.
Yes. Well, Ethan, thank you so much too. It's my first time being interviewed on somebody's podcast, so I'm glad it was yours, because you made it super easy.
Thank you so much to Laura Lynch for being a guest on the show today. You can find the complete show notes, including a transcript, photos of Laura and her tiny house, and links to Laura's website and the Less House, More Moolah podcast at thetinyhouse.net/279. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/279. Well, that's all for this week. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast.